Hamburg, May 1945. The rubble still smoked when American forces arrived. Among the displaced thousands stood Greta Hoffman, 23, hollow-eyed, her hands raw from digging through ruins. She had survived the firebombing, survived the collapse of everything she'd been taught to believe. What she couldn't survive was the look in her own eyes when she caught her reflection in a broken window. Then, a U.S. Navy sailor offered her a chocolate bar, and she realized she'd forgotten what kindness looked like. If you're enjoying these untold World War II stories, like and subscribe to join our history-loving community. Comment where you're watching from Berlin, Ohio, or anywhere in between. Your support helps us keep sharing these forgotten voices and bringing the past vividly back to life for everyone. Neither of them knew this moment would change everything. As Greta unwrapped that chocolate with trembling fingers, as James Mitchell washed her eyes well with tears over something so small, they stood on opposite sides of the widest chasm the 20th century had created, and in that moment, staring at each other across the ruins of her city, they both realized the same impossible truth. The war had ended, but the battle for their future was just beginning. The war had ended, but Hamburg still burned in memory. Smoke drifted across the Elbe River like ghosts that wouldn't rest. The air tasted of ash and defeat, of 1,000 fires that had consumed not just buildings, but certainties. Operation Gomorrah had come 2 years earlier, 8 days and 7 nights of firebombing that killed 43,000 people in a single week. The firestorm had created winds strong enough to uproot trees, temperatures hot enough to melt glass. Greta had survived by hiding in a basement that somehow, impossibly, hadn't collapsed. Now she stood in a processing line outside American occupation headquarters, her coat torn at the shoulder, her shoes held together with wires she'd scavenged from a fence. Around her, hundreds of German civilians waited silent, exhausted, their faces carrying the weight of a nation that had lost more than a war. The regime's propaganda still echoed in some minds, images of brutal occupiers, savage treatment, revenge. Yet watching young American sailors move through the crowd with clipboards and translators, Greta saw something different. They looked tired young. Some couldn't have been more than 19. Petty Officer Second Class James Mitchell stood near the distribution table, his uniform crisp despite 3 months in occupied Germany, 25 years old, from a small town in Ohio where the war had always felt distant, like something happening in a different world. Now he stood in the rubble of that world, handing out ration cards to people who looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, gratitude, suspicion. Sometimes all 3 at once. When Greta reached the front of the line, their eyes met for exactly 2 seconds. She looked down immediately, a habit learned from years of being told not to make eye contact with soldiers, with authority, with anyone who might notice her. James held out a ration card and a small wrapped chocolate bar. Standard issue comfort supplies the Navy distributed to help ease relations with the local population. "For you," he said simply. She took the chocolate bar, fingers trembling, and whispered, "Danke," almost inaudibly. She started to turn away. "Wait," James said instinctively. "What's your name?" The translator repeated the question. Greta hesitated, clutching the bar. "Greta Hoffman," she said finally. James wrote it down, then watched her disappear into the crowd. He didn't know why he'd asked. By evening, he would process hundreds more names. Yet something in her eyes stayed with him, not hollow exhaustion, but a spark, resilience maybe, or refusal to break completely. The next morning, Greta returned, not for rations, but because she'd seen Americans hiring German women for clerical work. She needed purpose beyond scavenging. James saw her in line and felt a shift. Though not assigned to hiring, he asked the officer if they needed another translator. "She speak English." "I don't know," James admitted, "but she could learn." "Fine," the officer said. "We need 10 more clerks." 3 days later, Greta appeared at American Occupation Headquarters, Hamburg District. The torn coat replaced with a clean gray dress, hair tied with a ribbon, face scrubbed. James noticed her across the room, clean and fed, moving with careful precision, learning procedures and organization. They didn't speak the first week. She filed displaced person records. He coordinated supply logistics. Still, he was aware of her, the intensity with which she bent over documents, her handwriting, the moments she paused to stare at the ruined skyline. 2 weeks later, he approached her desk under the pretext of a filing question. "Clerk Hoffman, I need clarification on these district codes." Her English was hesitant, but clear. "This is Altona. This is Eimsbüttel, the old districts. Before the bombing, before everything changed, thank you," he said, their fingers brushing briefly. "Your English is good." "I study," she said quietly. "Every night, the dictionary your Navy provides." "Why? Because I will not be helpless." Not again that night. He thought about her words. The Navy discouraged fraternization, yet he couldn't stop thinking about her fierce insistence, her will to regain control. The next day he left her a better dictionary, with a note, "For your studies, J.M." When she found it, he watched her smile, the first small fleeting curve of lips that transformed her face. June brought warmth, and Hamburg began to resemble a city again. Greta worked 6 days a week, English improving rapidly, efficiency earning quiet respect. James found excuses to visit her desk filing questions, translation clarifications. Each conversation revealed new things: the precision of her pronunciation, her quiet calm, her unspoken past. One afternoon he asked about her German. "My father was a teacher," she said. "Literature before the regime, before ideology replaced learning. What happened to him? The firebombing him. My mother, my younger sister, all the same night." James felt a crack in his chest. "I'm sorry," she shrugged, trying to appear casual, but he saw her hands tremble, her eyes blink rapidly, holding back grief that wouldn't come. That evening, breaking protocol, he waited for her. "I thought you might be hungry. There's a canteen. I could buy you dinner if you want." "Why?" she asked. "You shouldn't eat alone, and I'd like to talk to you." "Yes, I am very hungry." The canteen was crowded, smells thick with cooking. James brought a tray overflowing with food: meatloaf, potatoes, green beans, bread with butter, apple pie. She stared as if it might disappear. "This is too much," she murmured. "Eat what you want," he said. "Save the rest." She ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite with an intensity that made his throat tight. Watching her eat like every bite might be her last made him understand viscerally what the war had really meant for the people who'd lived through it on the losing side. "Tell me about Ohio," she said suddenly. "This is where you are from." "Small town," he said. "Farm country. Corn and soybeans mostly. Nothing like Hamburg. You have family there." "Parents, 2 sisters. A brother, he's in the Army, Pacific Theater. We haven't heard from him in 3 months." She nodded, understanding immediately what those 3 months of silence meant. "I hope he is safe." "What was your father teaching before Goethe, Schiller, the Romantics?" "He loved poetry." She was quiet, then added softly, "He would quote Goethe when things were difficult. Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. That's beautiful." He believed it, she said, and James heard anger underneath her exhaustion. He believed in beauty, in culture, in German greatness, meaning art and philosophy. Not, she trailed off, not war, not conquest, not the regime that had destroyed everything her father believed in. They talked until the canteen closed. She told him about Hamburg before the war, the harbor, the theaters, the famous Repair-Bond district full of music and life. He told her about Ohio summers, about fishing in the creek behind his parents' farm, about the day Pearl Harbor happened and how everything changed overnight. When they finally left, the June evening had turned cool, and the ruined city looked almost peaceful in the gathering dusk. James walked her toward the refugee housing district. "Thank you for dinner," she said when they reached the edge. "This was very kind. Can I see you again?" The question came more urgently than he intended. Not at the office, but like this. She studied him in the fading light. Did she see another American sailor, one of thousands occupying her defeated country? Or someone who saw her as more than Clerk 247, more than a German civilian, more than a survivor? "Yes," she said finally. "I would like this." Over the next month, they fell into a rhythm. James waited for her twice a week. They went to the canteen or walked through parts of Hamburg being rebuilt. She taught him German phrases. He brought her books from the Navy Library, English novels, to practice poetry that reminded her of her father. The other clerks noticed. Some were scandalized. Others pragmatic. A relationship with an American meant access to better food, protection, maybe a path out of occupied Germany. A few were envious. Greta ignored all of it. For the first time since the war ended, she felt something beyond exhaustion and grief. Not happiness exactly, but possibility. A future beyond just surviving. James felt it too. This wasn't like flirtations back home, the easy relationships with girls who shared his culture and language. This was deeper, bridging a chasm of war, language, trauma, and loss. One evening in late July, they sat on the steps of a partially repaired church, sharing bread and watching the sunset turn the Elbe River gold. Greta had been quiet all evening. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "I did not expect this," she said softly. "To feel like a person again, not just someone who survived, but someone who could have something." James understood. He took her hand the first time he dared and felt her fingers tighten around his. "You are a person," he said. "You've always been a person." "But I forgot," she whispered. "For a long time after the firebombing, I was just empty, going through motions. I forgot what it felt like to want something beyond food and shelter." "What do you want now?" he asked, heart hammering. She looked at him in the golden light, eyes less haunted, more alive. "I want to remember how to hope, and you make me think maybe I can." He kissed her then, gently, carefully, aware of the moment's fragility. She kissed him back, her hand rising to touch his face with a tenderness that made his chest ache. When they pulled apart, she was crying not sad tears, but something like relief, a soft exhale of hope after the darkness. "I thought I would never feel this way again," she whispered. "I thought the war destroyed this part of me." "It didn't," James said firmly. "You're still here. We're still here." But even as he said it, reality pressed against them. He was a U.S. Navy sailor on occupation duty. She was a German civilian in a defeated nation. The war might be over, but its consequences surrounded them. Love might grow in the ruins, but what future could it possibly have? August brought rumors that American forces would soon begin rotating home. The immediate crisis was stabilizing, and the Navy had more personnel than it needed. James heard the whispers in the barracks: possible reassignments, demobilization schedules, the probability that by Christmas he'd be back in Ohio. The thought made him sick with anxiety. He'd found something in Hamburg he hadn't known he was searching for. Going back to Ohio, to the farm, to the life he'd left, felt like a kind of death now. One evening in Midogest, Greta arrived at their meeting spot with an envelope in her hand and devastation in her eyes. "What's wrong?" James asked immediately. She handed him the envelope. Inside was an official notice. All German civilian workers would be reassigned to German administration by October. Greta would lose her job at headquarters, would be transferred to a German-run office with lower pay and no access to American facilities. "I will not see you any more," she said flatly. And Germans, she trailed off. Germans weren't supposed to fraternize with American personnel except in official capacities. The unspoken rule was becoming written. James felt panic rising. "We'll find a way? What?" Anger flashed across her face. "You are a Navy. You take orders. Soon you will leave Germany. Go home to Ohio, to America, to a place where there are no ruins, no hunger." She gestured helplessly at the devastated city. "Come with me," he said, the words coming out before he'd fully formed the thought. "When I go home, come with me." She stared at him. "What?" "Marry me," James said, heart racing. "Marry me, and you can come to America as my wife. The Navy has procedures for German war brides. There's paperwork, but it's possible." "James," she said carefully, "you cannot mean this." "Why not?" "Because you've known me for 3 months," she said, tears beneath her anger. "Because I am German, you are American. The war just ended. Your family will hate me. Everyone will see the enemy. This is impossible. But do you want it?" he pressed. "If it were possible, would you come with me?" She closed her eyes. When she opened them, tears streamed down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "God help me. Yes. I'd rather be hated in America with you than alone in Hamburg without you." "But James, we cannot just wish away reality. Watch me." He pulled her close. "I can't leave you here. I can't go back to Ohio wondering what happened to you. I love you." "I love you too," she said softly. Words impossible, yet true. They held each other as darkness fell over Hamburg. James decided he would make this work. He hadn't survived the war, crossed an ocean, or witnessed Europe's devastation to walk away from what he'd found. The paperwork was extensive: Navy forms, German certifications, character references, medical exams, financial affidavits. Authorities were suspicious. Some officers supported them, others disapproved. James persisted, and Greta navigated the broken German bureaucracy alongside him. They married in September at a simple civil registry. No white dress, no family, just 2 witnesses and a board official. When James slipped a gold band on her finger, bought with 2 weeks' pay, Greta's joy was fierce. "Greta Mitchell," she whispered. "It sounds American." "You are American now," he said. "I am yours," she corrected, kissing him. The Navy reassignment came through in October. James would return to the U.S. by December. Greta's immigration was delayed, leaving them in limbo. In late November, approval finally arrived. Relief hit them so intensely, James felt dizzy. In December, they crossed the Atlantic on a military transport. Greta spent most of it seasick and terrified. James stayed by her side, talking about Ohio to distract her. Around them, other servicemen and war brides were leaving everything behind. One night on deck, Greta, wrapped in James's coat, stared at the stars. He found her and turned her to face him. It will be hard. Some people will be cruel. But you survived with grace and didn't lose your ability to love. That's who you are, not your country, not the war. The ship docked in New York on December 15th. Greta's first sight of America was the Statue of Liberty emerging from fog, torched like a promise. Tears streamed down her face. "Welcome home," James whispered. On December 17th, they arrived in Millfield, Ohio, 2 days before Christmas. Snow covered the town. Lights twinkled. James's father met them, jaw tightening at her accent before extending his hand. "Welcome to Ohio, Mrs. Mitchell." The house was warm. James's mother hugged him, then offered polite hospitality to Greta. At dinner, James's parents asked careful questions. Greta felt the weight of leaving her country, language, and life behind, knowing she would always be foreign. James's father cleared his throat. "I lost a nephew at the Battle of the Bulge. Sarah from church lost both her sons. The Hendersons, their boy, came back with one leg." Silence fell. "I know," Greta said quietly. "I am sorry. Words cannot change what happened. I know my country did terrible things. I know you have every reason to hate me." "We don't hate you," his mother said, unconvincingly. "You do not trust me," Greta continued, "and I understand. If an American woman married a German man after the war, I would not trust her either." "Are you using my son to get into America?" James's father asked. "Dad," James began, but Greta touched his arm. "I love your son. He reminded me I was human. I will spend the rest of my life proving I am worthy of him, of the name Mitchell, of being a good American wife and daughter-in-law." James's parents exchanged a look. "I suppose we'll see," his father said. Tentative, not rejection, a beginning of a bridge across war.